Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Robins on the Wire, a Bristol Life podcast covering all things Bristol City. We've had a week to kind of refresh ourselves, a week away from the podcast. And in that time, Bristol City have played 3 matches, not won any of them. And a positive mood around Ashton Gate is probably slightly dampened over the last few days. But as usual, I'm joined by Jack Buchanan to discuss everything that's happened over the last few weeks at Ashton Gate. Jack, how are you doing, mate?
I'd be a lot better if we'd managed to win one of those 3 games. I had a nice pie in Preston, so I'm still living off that at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, I've heard a lot. Is this the famous butter pie?
Mate, it's sensational. I'm going to have to do a little piece on it before we get into the proper podcast. If anyone likes mashed potato and pies, go to Preston, go to Deepdale and order a butter pie. About £3.50 it'll set you back, but it's excellent. That's my piece done.
Yeah, shameless promo there for Preston's. I don't even know Preston's pies. What a start that is to the podcast. How else would you want to start your reflections on a busy week at Bristol City? We'll kind of gloss over the Ipswich and Preston games. So I don't think they feel a long time ago now. I don't know about you after the weekend's defeat to QPR, but probably 2 quite positive showings. Like I said, we won't spend too much time on it, but to only take 2 points from those games, real sense of disappointment there.
Yeah, I think 4 would have been the right outcome, I think. Definitely should have won up at Deepdale. Mehmeti missing, obviously, the 1-on-1 and forcing an incredible save from Iverson right at the death. And then Ipswich, I think a point was probably fair enough. I think we maybe had a few chances that we should have taken, but they had a couple as well. Obviously, the penalty is maybe a little bit dubious. I haven't seen it back since. It'd be interesting to get some thoughts on that from listeners. But yeah, 2 points. It's not ideal, really, is it? Especially when you then go on and lose to QPR.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the hinge point for me, really, that 2 points against Preston and QPR, Preston and Ipswich aren't bad results. They feel like bad results when you get nothing out of QPR and nothing out of Oxford. I think that's kind of where I feel like, especially the Ipswich point, because, you know, when the fixtures came out, that kind of felt like City's first real test, didn't it? Especially, you know, we'll get onto the lack of depth, I think, in a second, but with the injuries they've got, no Jason Knight, that was the first game without the captain for best part of a year and a half. You know, it was a really positive point that should have been more. I think probably the fair assessment on that.
Yeah, 100%. The main chance that sticks out to me is when Sinclair Armstrong comes off the bench, and he had, I think we were discussing it on the podcast a week or 2 ago. He had a chance almost identical to that one he scored against Plymouth, his last goal for us, which was back in November of last year now. And he goes through, he opens his body up, and the keeper does quite well to shut the angle, to be fair, but he just takes a split second too long, and he can't quite curl it around him, which was frustrating at the time.
I think me and you had a long old chat about this last week, didn't we? Where we kind of like slowed it right down. It feels like there's that 1 second where he looks up and it gives Palmer that a little bit of time to just get across his goal, properly get that left boot out, and really like almost starfish himself to close off the angle. And yeah, that felt like the chance, didn't it? And it kind of summed up where it feels like Sinclair is a little bit at the moment. You know, the ball then bounces into him and goes out for a goal kick rather than a corner. It does feel like he's just not got that rub of the green at the moment. And that's something I think we can say about City as a whole, probably the last few weeks. I'm sure we'll come on to that more so with QPR. But I think that's our focus for today, really, isn't it, that game? I think if you think back to when the team news came out, the headline news for me was the fact that Rob Atkinson was fit to play a 3rd game in a week. What was that the standout for you?
Yeah, that, and obviously the change as well, McCrory coming out for Sykes. I think it made sense, to be fair, at the time. Sykes always playing an intriguing part in our goal with a pretty woeful cross that got kept in by Neto. But yeah, Atkinson was the key one, obviously, seeing your article from the press conference the day before when Struber said he was fit, he's good to go. I think it was a bit of a surprise, to be fair. But maybe if we've got a fully fit back line, he maybe gets rested for one of those 2 games. I don't know. But either way, a good addition to have, although he didn't have a great game in the end.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I had a look back because I was trying to see if he'd played like 3 games in a week for Portsmouth last year. And from what I could tell, I think he did a couple of times. I don't think he played the full 90, but it might be one of those things that's a bigger deal in City fans' heads than it maybe should be because of the fact, you know, I don't know you, I didn't watch him every week at Portsmouth, but you're kind of used to him needing to be managed and taking those time and giving him 60 minutes here and then a rest here. But I do think it's a really good sign that he's managed to get through 3 games that early on. I think, you know, he always comes off like the walking wounded. anyway, doesn't he? We've said that a few times that he can have the quietest game of his life and he hobbles off. Rob Atkinson, he's one of those players. But I think the McCrory change made sense to me. I think, especially with the injuries he's had in the past, to get him, it's kind of gone under the radar. I think the fact that he's been fit for the best part of probably about 7-8 months now, really, as far as I can think. But you mentioned Sykes there. Obviously, that meant George Tanner was still in that slightly deeper role. And I think, and obviously Zach Vyner in midfield. What did you make of Zach's display on Saturday? Because obviously, I think there was a lot of positivity around him after Tuesday night.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. It could have been better, but for a centre-back playing in midfield, I don't, off the top of my head anyway, remember him getting anything drastically wrong. Tuesday night against Ipswich, I thought he did really, really well for someone sort of stepping into a semi-unfamiliar role with him. So he hasn't played there for the last few years since he was at Rotherham and Aberdeen and stuff like that, which we were talking about on the podcast that never saw the light of day last week. But he did okay. It was a shame that we didn't have Jason Knight because I think it does massively improve the team having Knight in there and then having Vyner drop back into the defensive line. I think it plays a huge part. But yeah, he did okay.
Yeah, and it was quite an open first, probably half an hour, really, wasn't it? There was a couple of times City got in behind, QPR's pacing behind, did carry a real threat, didn't it? I think there was a few times Vitek had to make, never saves, but a couple of quite bright sort of movements off his line to claim low crosses. And then the real big talking point of that probably first 20 minutes or so is the Scott Twine chance, isn't it? I don't really know where to start with that one. There's a lovely move between Mehmeti and Reece, sets Reece away down the left side of the box, cuts it back to Twine. He must be about 8-9 yards out, and in almost like sort of Lee Tomlin penalty style, picks out the Atio stand. I mean, could you quite believe it when you saw where that one ended up?
I was in disbelief, especially when he turned around and I realised it was Twine. When the ball was struck, obviously I sit right down the other end in section 82, so it's quite hard to sometimes work out who's who when there's a lot of bodies to look through. With all due respect, I assumed it was Zach Vyner, kind of marauding into the penalty box somehow, but obviously it wasn't, and it makes it even more frustrating. If it's a centre-back turn midfielder getting his boot on that, you can kind of understand why it's flying over the bar, but not when it's someone like Scott Twine. It was a bit of a gilt-edged chance, and we had a couple of those, I think.
Yeah, it just feels like the sort of one. Like I say, it kind of sums up where City are at the moment. It feels a bit like to me that you think about the goals they scored in that first run of games where it did feel like almost everything they struck went in. The opening day is almost a perfect example of that one, where the one comes off Mehmeti's shin to make it 3 at Bramall Lane really early on in the second half. It doesn't feel like they've quite got that rub of the green. And it was one of those where you almost type in goal in the live blog because the cutbacks there, Scott Twine, you hit the target from there, you're pretty much guaranteed to score, aren't you? And to not just miss, but miss by that far, it really was a surprise. And actually, when you think back at how the rest of the game panned out, it only feels an even bigger miss, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually thought he had a relatively poor game, Twine. I don't think he's been really at his best since the last international break. Obviously, he had a great run at the start of the season. And he seems to have gone off the boil a little bit, as have City in the last 4 games, to be fair. I don't know. That might just be me. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts, obviously, a bit higher up. You see a bit more of what he does.
I think the nature of how Scott Twine plays, he always feels like one of those players that, I don't know quite what the word is, but he seems to be one of those that when City are playing well, he plays well. I think because he tries the difficult stuff. He's not your sort of number 10 that's going to just keep possession and just relax on the ball. I think it's a nature of sometimes he comes off worse when he's the one trying to get stuff ticking and get stuff moving. I think I can't remember what game it was. It might have been the Oxford game where it felt like he tried 3 or 4 balls, like sort of through balls behind the defence, and every single one was cut out by someone. It just didn't quite stick. Or, he'll try to play that sort of chip ball. The ball that picks out Mehmeti for the goal against Sheffield Wednesday up at Hillsborough. He'll try that sort of something a bit different, something a bit, I don't know what word to use. Like I think Struber would probably say that sort of sexy pass. Do you know what I mean? That a bit of something a bit flash. And that means that when you're playing well and things are working, it's leading to goals, you get a lot of the praise because you're the one showing that bit of invention to cut a team open. When you're not playing as well, you're not taking those chances and it's not quite working, and all you need to do is get it past a yard wrong. sometimes you can look like the one who's almost breaking up attacks. And I think him and Mehmeti both have that similar sort of, not issue, but that sort of factor that, because they play in that certain way, when they do something wrong, it feels like the thing that kills an attack or kills a scoring chance. So it can always stand out a bit more. But I do agree with you. I thought that kind of summed up his afternoon, that chance, because there were another couple of occasions he got the ball, and I think it's in the second half, the one where he gets the ball on the edge of the box and he chops in on his left, and he almost just waits and can't get a shot away before he's tackled. And there's another one where he got released down the right side of the box, and it's a simple cross. He's got 2 or 3 to aim for, and it goes straight into the south stand. And it just felt to me like he just didn't quite have his radar on how he can, when he's at his best. He's so technically good. It just didn't feel like he quite found his rhythm on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one where he cut back and on his left really confused me, because he's an excellent footballer, but he doesn't have the best of left foots. When you compare it to his right, from that sort of range especially, it was like, just inside the D, maybe on the edge of the box. That's the range we all know Scott Twine can score from. We've seen him do it countless times for City, for MK Dons, Burnley, etc., etc. Like, I don't get why he had the space as well, because when he does the fake shot, the defender buys it, he goes flying. So there's no reason. I don't think that the defender would have been quick enough to block it if he just unleashed one. It might not fly into the top corner. It could go to Rose out of the south stand, like his cross did. But I don't think anyone would have begrudged him for having a dig from there. So it did confuse me a little bit, because by the time he came back in, all of a sudden he had like 4 defenders in front of him, and like you said, couldn't get the shot off.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, he's one of those players, isn't he, that he'll try the difficult things, and that can be a great thing. That wins you points at some points. Equally, there's going to be games where it doesn't quite click. It's really going to stand out, and you're going to go, "Oh, this proved costly on this day." It's similar to, I guess, to Mehmeti at Preston, where it's weird because you feel like you're criticising him for missing those 2 chances when he deserves loads of credit, especially the second chance at Preston, for carving out that chance, if that makes sense. And it's that weird thing of, you can almost harm your rating, not to use the player or anything, but almost harm how you're viewed from a game, despite being the difference maker. I don't know if that quite makes sense, but that's what City needs from those 2 tens, isn't it? And that's when you think that's those games where they've been at their best. It's been Twine and Mehmeti pulling the strings, marauding forward, getting around Reece. And actually, when you think back to the game on Saturday, that's almost what makes it so frustrating, is that they did make they got into those sort of areas, but just didn't take the chances when they came.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was almost a similar story harping back to Oxford 2 weeks ago, where we had the chances, and they were all falling to Emil Reece that day. And he couldn't find the net, which is so unlike him. We saw him on Saturday. Did he have another chance other than the goal? Off the top of my head, I can't immediately think of a clear-cut one. Although, to be fair, I can't immediately think of that many clear-cut chances that City had on Saturday, other than the ones we've spoken about. But it's just, like you said, the rub of the green sometimes hasn't really gone with us as of late. But yeah, it's always frustrating when it's the 2 tens that are off their game, because, like we said, they're the ones that are trying to make things happen, provide that little moment of magic. Again, like Mehmeti did against Oxford, just firing one into the top corner. And we've seen it countless times. But it'd be interesting to see how we look when we come back from the break, I think, because it's a real chance to it's the first chance I think Struber's had to work on stuff since the season began, because when we went into the September break, everything was rosy. We had 8 points from 4, I think. Whereas from the 5 since, we've only picked up 5 points. So it's a drastic change. You've gone from 2 points per game to 1 point per game, to look at it in a stat sort of mindset. There's bits that I think are becoming clearer that we need to sort out.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. You mentioned it there as well. We'll better touch on the goal, because it's kind of easy to forget that City did go 1-0 up in that game. You mentioned Sykes' overhit cross earlier. He got slightly fortunate. It looked like every single QPR player assumed it had gone out, and Neto Borges remained alert. And it was a lovely little flick back into Emil Reece, and the header. It's one of those where I almost think the celebration seemed quite muted. It was almost like City was just waiting for someone to say it had gone out of play, because it was such a good ball back in. And the header actually to find that space and then nod it back into the other corner. No keeper's ever going to manage to shift their weight, are they? It was really what ended up being quite a disappointing day for City. Quite a really nice move.
Yeah, 100%. It was like you said, maybe a little bit fortunate that Borges was the one that remained alert, and it's a hell of a ball back in to find Emil Reese. And I think we all know he's so dangerous in those sort of areas. Is that the first header we've seen him score for us? Maybe. Everything else I think has been coming off his right boot mainly. But yeah, it was nice to see. Obviously, when you got a man of his sort of size and stature up front, you know, he's not a short striker, is he? He might not be known necessarily for purely being an aerial threat, but it was nice to see him sort of tick that one off the list with a cracking sort of classic looping header back across goal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was proper, real striker's goal, wasn't it? And I think, you know, it's easy to forget that he's had a difficult couple of weeks. You think back to Oxford, where he missed quite a few chances. It felt like Preston, obviously, on his return to his old club, he looked like he struggled to get into the game that day. And then Ipswich, although I actually thought he was pretty good against Ipswich, I think he did exactly what we know he can do of running the channels, hold up the ball. He didn't get much in the way of chances. So to get that opportunity and take it that calmly, you know, takes into fourth of the season, which, you know, we've mentioned a couple of other strikers. You know, that's more than Sinclair managed last season. It's more than Fally managed in this half a season. Yeah, he started well. 4 after 9 games isn't a bad return, I don't think, at all. If he keeps that up, you know, you'd imagine he'll be somewhere between around that 15, hopefully higher mark. So yeah, really good to see him get on the score sheet. And it kind of set that kind of almost kickstarted a decent spell for City, I felt, heading into the second half. The press seemed quite good. And they actually went into the break, weirdly, although it was only 1-0 and QPR could have scored. I don't know about you, but I felt pretty like they pretty much deserved that, and felt that if they got a second, they'd kill that game off.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it in my video at half time. I was like, right, all we need here, I think, is come out, nick a goal early, because their heads QPR's heads, I think, dropped slightly after the goal. They were really pushing us for that first 20 or so. Sato down the left hand side, especially, was having a great game. I thought he's a real good player. And then they just didn't really get going again after we scored. I know there was only 10, 15 minutes before the break then, but yeah, I said it myself at half time. I was like, get another early, kill them off. And we came out and had a couple of decent chances, or a couple of good positions at least, before they got the equaliser. As soon as they got that equaliser, it was very much sort of one-way traffic for the next 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, something the QPR manager mentioned post-match was that he felt the heads kind of dropped after the goal. Second half, that kind of continued, and then as soon as Kone scores, it felt like that momentum shifted. And you've got to remember, this is a QPR team that aren't used to losing games. You know, they've had a really good run since they got, was it 7-1? They got pumped by Coventry, and since then they've not lost a game in 6 now. The Kone goal, I'd be interested to get your view on it, because it was one of those where almost watching it, I couldn't quite work out how it had got there. But to me, it just felt like too many people, I don't know what the term would be, it felt like too many players not quite taking responsibility and grabbing that moment by the horns defensively. Would that be fair from your point of view?
I think everybody expected someone else to do something with it, because, yeah, like you said, nobody really took it by the scruff of the neck. It was almost, I think it was Harvey Vale had just come off the bench. His cross came in about 4 times in that sort of same passage of play almost. It was just like, cross comes in, gets cleared, somehow ends up going back to him. Ball comes in, gets cleared. Even when it ends up in the net, we sort of half clear it from my memory. And then he picks it up and he just absolutely wallops it into the net. And you can't really miss from there unless you're forcing some sort of wonder save from Vitek, which we have seen him do. But even he couldn't stop that. It was an absolute rocket into sort of the roof of the net.
Yeah, I think you needed one of those where you needed 2 keepers to get a hand on it, let alone keep it out. From my point of view, it looked like he absolutely rifled it in. And like you say, from that moment on, it did feel like the momentum kind of swung a little bit. Not to say City didn't have chances, because was it after, I can't remember if it was before or after the goal, Mehmeti had the one. That's one of the standout ones to me, where he cuts in from the sort of middle of the box onto his left, has a go with his left foot, and the City players looked convinced, and from where I was, it looked like it had been deflected wide. No corner given by the referee. That's probably one of the first times we'll mention him today, and probably come on to him more. Ross McCrory, a couple of really good opportunities cutting in from the right. One that ended up in the south stand, but City were threatening, and then I think Matt Withers in our fan column for Bristol Live this week used the word sucker punch or gut punch. Maybe I think he might have used both. And Paul Smythe, who scored that ridiculous goal from the halfway line last season, somehow gets the jump on City's back line and heads it in. So just talk us through that one from your point of view, Jack.
Their goal is their winning goal is incredibly weak from McCrory. I think I appreciate the shout for he's had two hands in his back, should be a foul. Which all right, I suppose by the laws of the game it should be, but it's not two hands in the back and a push really. Like it's not enough to make 6 foot something big strong Scottish bloke Ross McCrory crumble to the floor like he did against 5'7", 8" Paul Smith. He shouldn't be getting the jump on McCrory there at all.
It's interesting, this one, because I thought the same as you first time. I thought, to me, it looks like McCrory, again, it was wrong for me to say I've played football at a terrible level my whole life. I'm not a professional footballer, but to me, it feels like one of those where if you get goal side of your man, he can't push you, and you should just be able to jump that height, should be able to jump over and head it clear. But when you actually look at it, the reason McCrory is where he is because the hands go on the back. And I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think back to examples we've seen in the past, and I almost think Paul Smith, whatever it is, gets away with it because of his height. Because I was thinking to times we've seen the likes of a Sinclair Armstrong or Jeju or even Emil Reese sometimes, where if they get the jump on someone and raise their hands at all, because of their height, the referee almost goes, you don't need that advantage, so I'm going to blow for the free kick. Whereas you almost get the feeling it's the other way around with this one, where the referee's probably looked at him and thought exactly what you've just thought of. Big, strong Ross McCrory against Paul Smythe. He can do what he wants because he's got to get the jump on him. And I almost think that probably makes it even more of a foul in my mind. And I think, Gelhardt was pretty... I joked to someone in the press room after the Ipswich games. He was so reluctant to talk about the penalty decision and so adamant that it was a penalty. I mentioned to someone that I felt like, he's not the sort of manager we're ever going to get talking about referees. And it was interesting, actually, post-match on Saturday, he was very much, this was a foul, there's two hands in the back, it's a push. And you could see by McCrory's reaction, as soon as he hit the ground, I didn't show the ball hit the net, and he was looking at the ref like, come on. And whether or not it was a foul or not, it does feel like what we mentioned there, that stroke of luck, that, whether you get those decisions or not, it is luck, to be quite frank, isn't it? And City at the moment don't seem to be getting that luck.
No, we don't, not at all. And it's frustrating there, isn't it? And to keep talking about the ref, about 5 minutes later, Neto Borges gets headbutted. So I'm not quite sure how that wasn't a penalty from where I was anyway. I don't know if you've had a different view of it. I've seen a view from the Dolman, and the ref is looking directly at them. I think it was Jimmy Dunn, goes up with Neto for the header. And admittedly, I think he does head the ball. I'm not quite sure which one of them heads the ball. But he also goes straight into Neto's face. So how it's not a penalty, I ain't got a clue. Yeah,
again, Struber was pretty adamant on that one, that he felt it was a penalty. Look, in real time, it's one of those where, to be quite honest, I'm typing in the blog first. What I'm trying to type first is that, his free kicks hit the wall. And then you halfway through typing that and you see the ball go up. So you have a quick look down at the penalty area to see what's happening. And to me, it looked like one of those, at first instance, I thought Neto's got there first. He's got a decision to make here. Because it was quite clear he's won the ball. It's gone that way. It's gone the way that it can only have gone if he's won the header. And then the guys arrived. And you could see by the reaction of the players that it must have been late, because I think this group are quite relaxed. They're a competitive group, but they're not massive moaners, a lot of them. And I think it was Zach Viner came flying over to the ref. There were a couple of others that were straight there. And like you say, the ref's got a really good look at it from the angle, from the Dolman. You can see he's had a really good look. And I might be wrong, but it felt to me like one of those where you've almost got a referee probably a bit nervous about making that big a decision for something that can be viewed as a coming together, rightly or wrongly. I was talking to someone in the press box after the game, and I said, if it's one of those where if Borges kicks it away with his foot and then Dunn kicks his foot, it's a penalty every day, isn't it? If he arrives late with his feet, the referee gives the penalty. But I think because it's almost an aerial duel and there's bodies and they're both looking at the ball, you've got that thing of a referee's thinking, is it clear and obvious? Probably is the thought process going through his head. And while I think if you're not sure, firstly, your assistant's the other side who should be watching the ball and have a pretty decent idea. You've got the fourth official from the other angle. That sort of trifecta there. You've got three of them all having a look at it. but he didn't even look like he particularly considered it. He just kind of waved play on, didn't it? It didn't ever feel like he was going to give a penalty for that one.
Well, he can't have had that much of a decision because he booked Atkinson for moaning at him in the same sort of phase of play, like we just said, where Viner and a few others went flying over to the ref, and I think it was I can't remember who it was now. Might have been Randall. At full time was having a word with him as well. The ref got booed off as well, which was interesting. Always makes me chuckle when that happens because it's hard to tell sometimes after a loss if it's the players or the refs that's getting booed. You have to wait until it's only the ref walking down the tunnel before you can actually work it out. But yeah, probably should have been a penalty. I think we've been very unlucky with refs in these last 3 home games, haven't we? We had the corner that was never a corner that Oxford scored from.
Yeah,
the dubious penalty on Tuesday night, and then the again possibly slightly dubious penalty, and the goal that maybe shouldn't have stood and maybe should have been a penalty. Who knows? But if only we had VAR in the Championship.
Yeah, well, I think this is always the interesting thing, isn't it? You talk to Premier League fans and they always say, "Oh no, we hate it. It's killed our game. You know, it's killed the atmosphere." And then you talk to Championship fans who probably speak to most Bristol City fans this weekend. I imagine they'd have been saying, "Yeah, we need it, 100%." It's an interesting debate, but I do think the officials, they've got a hard job out there, and if there's any way to make that easier, from my point of view, my attitude should be that it probably should be taken. It's probably a debate to have at another point, but like you said, I think the luck thing's kind of my takeaway from that. I put it in the verdict at the weekend that it's not my job to sit here and say whether those decisions are right or wrong. I'm not a referee. What I can say is that to have the corner, the 2 penalty calls in 1 week, and the goal all go against you, while also having a game where Scott Twine misses from about 8 yards, Anis Mehmeti misses 2 chances that you bet your house on him to score this season, and there's been so many instances, hasn't there, this season where it's felt like, well, not even in this season, but in this last 3 or 4 games where you think that first month of the season it probably goes City's way, and it's the age-old saying that these things even themselves out over the course of the season. If that's the case, City are probably due a run of good luck after the international break, you'd hope.
Yeah, 100%. Before anyone mentions it on Twitter or in a YouTube comment, I keep turning my camera off because this light's being weird. But anyway, moving back onto that, yes, we are absolutely due a good run of luck, but it feels like we've been due a good run of luck since Nigel Pearson had a moan in the car park at a ref after the Stoke game 4 years ago or whatever it was now. So whether or not we'll ever actually get that, who knows? Maybe we get like a incredible run of good luck and end up in Europe. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, nice European away day. Well, I guess the kind of after that penalty decision, it did kind of feel like the game heated out. Feels almost like the wrong word, because there were still chances. I think Hirakawa's header might have been after that. There were real chances probably to get something out of the game, but I don't think they had never got a save out of Paul Nardi, did they, in the goal? It never quite had that moment where you thought they're going to find the way this weekend, like we have done so many times at Ashton Gate recently.
Yeah, not really. That Hirakawa header is very unfortunate, isn't it? You want basically anybody else on the pitch to end up in that position, bless him. It falls to the shortest man on the team, possibly the shortest man on the pitch, actually. If that falls to no, it wasn't on the pitch, but an Emil Reese, even a Sinclair Armstrong, you back them to at least just get their head over it and sort of head down. Whereas it almost felt like he jumped quite early and it just kind of hit him on the top of the head and went over with no real danger. But yeah, like you said, just not a lot really happened after that penalty decision. It was like, oh, we might do. But I think everyone was a bit more like, yeah, we probably won't.
Yeah, I think Hirakawa's not, like you say, he's not the sort of person you'd be desperate to have in that situation. I can't think of many times he's headed the ball full stop. It's obviously just not part of his game that's particularly good. I think that kind of takes us to the end of the game, like as it happened. I think the main talking point, what I've seen on social media amongst supporters since the game finished, has been around the strength of depth of this squad. And I think it's worth talking about, isn't it? Because I think we're at a situation where, look, there are a hell of a lot of senior players out injured at the moment, and the senior players that would be starting if they were fit. We can reel them off. To have no Jason Knight, no Jay Williams, no Max Bird, no Luke McNally, Max O'Leary's been out, Cam Pring's been out. Josh Stokes, who would be like, you've only got to look at the bench to know that he would be in the squad, is out. I think, if we just say those 7, there's probably more that I've missed that I can't even think of at this moment in time. Without 7 first-team players, there's not many Championship teams that be able to cope with that particularly well. However, it does feel like, particularly without those 7 players, there is quite a limited pool of players at the moment who Struber feels can start games and you can stay at that standard that he needs. I think that's demonstrated by the fact, I think I put out the stat is 7 or 8 players started all 3 games in this run of 3. And of those, I think it was 8. Of those 8, 5 played the full 90 minutes in all 3 games, which to me says that, there's a core group there that he doesn't feel he can win or compete or implement his style in games without them being on the pitch. And to compete in a 46-game championship season where quite often you're going to play 3 games in a week, I'm not sure that's enough depth to thrive.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, but it'd be interesting when we get to sort of November sort of time, maybe hopefully in a month's time, where we're a bit further down the line and we probably have 4 of those senior players come back. I know it's someone like Luke McNally we're not looking at for a little while yet, but you hopefully have a couple of them coming back in and into training or something like that, at least just to give a little bit of a buzz, because it's going to be a tricky run. We've got a really tough run actually after this break of games. I don't think we've really got a easy. John Palmer will put me for this, but there's no easy games in the Championship. But I don't really think we've got an easy game until Blackburn at home, maybe. They've not been great so far, but it's a really tough run. We come back into Norwich, of course, which will be interesting for different reasons. Whether or not Manning's still there after yesterday is up for debate, I suppose, at the moment. And then you go into Southampton and Birmingham and Stoke, and they're 3 teams that are doing all right. Southampton a little bit less so, but they're still a big team, and it's not going to be an easy game. Blues and Stoke are kind of on a bit of a roll at the moment.
Yeah, I think it kind of. Obviously, there's no such thing as an easy game in the Championship. But let's say, I think it'd be optimistic. I wouldn't be expecting anyone maybe other than O'Leary to be in the squad of the injured group for Norwich. And I think, a few people have pointed out, actually, there's not many games between blocks this time round. It's quite a condensed little group of cluster with only a few games. The messaging from the club has been, from Gerhard, has been very much a case of weeks with Joe Williams, Jason Knight, Max Bird, and Campering. The suggestion was that on Friday's pre-match press, I think he was asked if it was about mid-October was still right for Williams and Pring, and his suggestion was not exactly. I think I'm not quoting him exactly there. You can find it on the site, his exact quotes, but seemed to suggest that was unlikely. So you're returning in mid-October. So let's say none of them are back for Norwich, maybe O'Leary. I'd be surprised if Jason Knight with a groin injury is back in the week straight, back immediately. Same with Max Bird. Let's say it's the same calf injury he had in pre-season. He sustained that before they went to Portugal, which was the second week of pre-season, and he missed the first day of the season at Sheffield United. So that's probably about a 4 or 5 week injury. If it was the exact same injury, we're still probably 3 or 4 weeks away from seeing him this time round. And Gerhard said he's not been clear if it is the same injury, but let's say it is. You're still probably a few weeks away from that. Joe Williams, it seems to be that he's a bit further behind by what Gerhard said, where they want him to be. So it's probably a few more weeks, at which point you're getting into the point where we're probably talking there's potential of 4 or 5 games where you're going with the same squad that we've seen the last week with Max O'Leary added. And you'd have to imagine at the moment Max O'Leary's probably not. He might replace Lumley on the bench, but he's not going to be replacing Radek Vitek. So it's a bit of a daunting prospect, I think. Like you said, there's quite difficult games with a very real possibility of being down to, in a lot of areas, what feels like a threadbare squad, particularly midfield.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, as good as it is to have O'Leary back, he probably won't displace Vitek. He's definitely not going to come and do a job in the centre midfield. So it'll be tough, is the bottom line. I think if those are the timelines that end up coming true, which hopefully someone makes some sort of miraculous recovery and comes back early. But realistically, that's probably what we're looking at. It's got to be a tough old, 4 weeks or so between the breaks, where we'll more or less need to just get what we can and regroup and hopefully go again once everyone comes back from injury. The good thing to remember, I suppose, good thing, silver lining, I guess, is that last season we were pretty poor up until Christmas, and then it turned around and we flew up into the top 6. So, if we're sat in 11th by the time those people come back from injury, it's not the end of the world. I think a lot of people maybe overreacted a little bit to these last 4 games online. And I think people need to remember we are very, very early on in the season still. We don't need to panic just yet. And we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think I wrote in the verdict on Saturday night that, I think I've seen a few people and spoken to a few people that used the phrase the Struber bubble's burst. And I think I understand why people are saying that, because when you think about how we headed into the September break where it was so much positivity, it was that feeling of, not me, but journalists were asking about automatic promotion. There was that feeling of this team could really kick on and achieve something this year. It does feel at the moment we've gone in a bit more of a downer, haven't we? We've gone in on that sort of feeling of, okay, we're back into City, back into that sort of mid-table. What can they achieve this season? But equally, they're 3 points off QPR, who are going in, changing their Twitter bio at the weekend for being in the top 6, and their fans, you look at how they were the other day, they were so upbeat. Coventry are top of the league, and I'm seeing people suggest that, they're probably going to win it, and they're only 6 points ahead of City. It's when you actually look at this division, yeah. I know it feels like we say it every year, but it's ridiculously tight this year. It is incredibly tight. It feels like anyone can beat anyone, and you've only got to look at City's results to see that. They've lost to Oxford, who have then struggled to get results elsewhere. They've absolutely smashed Sheffield Wednesday, who went and beat Portsmouth a couple of days later, and then Portsmouth go and beat Middlesbrough. It's a bizarre division. It is completely open, and that's probably what makes this last few weeks more frustrating, is because it's so open. If you put together a run, if you'd beaten Oxford, if you'd taken the points you should have got at Ipswich and Preston, you'd be level on points with Coventry, and we'd all be going, oh my God, Gerhard Struber, what a great manager, what a great team. Who cares that there's injuries? Do you know what I mean? It's that. I think it's so easy to get caught up in what's happening just with the team you support and feel like the world's ending because they're having a tough time, without having a look elsewhere and thinking, actually, Southampton are really struggling under Will Steele. Norwich under Liam Manning, they've not got going yet. Even Ipswich are doing better. They're only in and around where City are. The 3 relegated teams have not found it easy. It's wide open. There's another 37 games if there's 9 played. Yeah, 37 games to play. So I'm not going to do the maths because I'm not good enough at that. But that's a lot of points between now and the end of the season. Nothing's decided, and 6 points is a nothing gap. They need 2. City haven't played Coventry yet. If they happen to beat them twice, those 6 points are not going to happen, is it? Probably, but you make up those 6 points with 2 wins.
Yeah, absolutely. 121 points. No, 111 points still to play for. So who knows? We could break the points record yet, mate. Anything can happen. That Coventry game will certainly be interesting. We always take a good backing up there. I think it's all about Dad's birthday. So whether or not I'll be able to make it, who knows? Hopefully. Might try and convince him to go. But games like that, it'll, if only there was a time where we could have got 3 points off QPR, I might still be 6th. But it'll be very interesting, I think, to see where we lie come the November international break, and then kicking on from there. That's when you need to put some good runs together, because that's a 3.5 month period of solid football where you're playing at least 2 a week, more often than not, probably 3, especially through December. Christmas we're playing Boxing Day, then the 29th, then New Year's Day, then the 4th of January. That's 4 games in 8 days, 9 days. Those are the times where you need to put the run together. So whether or not we do it, I suppose it remains to be seen. But that's where we sort of thrived in the end last season, was that period through to the March international break, and then slightly beyond that. So maybe we'll do the same.
Yeah, maybe. And I think the thing is, this has probably been quite a good learning week for Struber as well, because I thought it was interesting. He's spoken a lot about needing that big roster, as he puts it, that big squad. And then in Friday's presser, he kind of admitted, he's not the sort of coach to make loads of changes. And, I thought that was interesting, because that kind of feels like a bit of a departure from what he said before. I think he'll also have perhaps it'll serve a bit as a reminder of how demanding, a week of Championship football is like that. And he mentioned in his post-match press to us that, he doesn't feel his system can work when players drop down to 80% was what he felt. He didn't mention names, didn't throw anyone under the bus of who he felt dropped down to that sort of percent. The question is going to be for him is, does he feel the players waiting in the wings are better at 100% than somebody is at 80%? And, the early evidence to me suggests that he probably has that group that he trusts, and he doesn't feel quite yet that he has the quality elsewhere to throw them into the fold. And, it's all well and good having a big squad and depth, but it needs to be depth that your coach trusts. And I'm not 100% sure, based on the evidence of the last week, quite who is in that trustworthy group and who isn't.
Yeah, 100%. I think it'll be interesting if we get, hopefully we don't get another injury in the back line or in midfield. Definitely not up front. As to what sort of changes get made, or if someone picks up a little niggling thing in training, they can't quite start on the Saturday. It'd be interesting to see who comes in, because like you said, I don't think we're going to see roaring changes at any point. 9 times out of 10, he's named an unchanged team this year. And to be fair, 9 times out of 10, we've been getting the results, more or less. And there's not really been a need to change it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But yeah, it'll be an interesting next 5-6 games, I think, between now and the international break.
Yeah, and obviously got quite a quiet spell now. Obviously, no game till that Norwich game, which is about 13-12 days away from where we are now. I think we spoke to him about the plans for this break. I believe the players are in tomorrow they're probably in today, Monday, as we record this. But Tuesday, the plan is to do an in-house game, he confirmed. So, that is very much a game between the squad itself. I don't think opposition are coming in. It's not like a behind closed doors game. It sounds like it's a in-house proper, I imagine 11v11. I'm not sure quite who's going to be playing in that, where you might end up being a five-a-side with injuries. That'll be a chance, I think, to get some minutes in the legs. And I imagine they're going to have a little bit of a break before coming back in for a full week, I'd imagine, in the lead up to Norwich. I guess we've kind of touched on it, Jack, but just general assessment of where City are at the moment. How are you feeling about it? Where do you feel they're at? And how has your mood kind of changed, I guess, in this block of 5 games that it is?
I still think we'll be in and around the playoffs. I think what's been interesting to me is the last 3 videos I put out. So Ipswich, Preston, and then QPR as well. All the time there have been comments saying we're one of the better sides they've played this season. You'll definitely be in the playoffs. Good luck, blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting to me, the most of them came at Preston, to be fair, and they've already played, I think, Middlesbrough and Leicester at home. And obviously us and someone else as well. And they were all saying, you'll definitely be up there again. Can't see why not. And admittedly, we were really, really good, I thought, Preston, barring Mehmeti not having his shooting boots on. But to even create those chances, Preston didn't really have much of a sniff, other than that little double save that Vitek had to make in the first half. So yeah, I still think we'll be in and around it. I don't see a reason as to why not. I think it's just a little bit of a rocky patch, but everybody goes through those points in the season. Sunderland won the playoffs last year. All right, they didn't have it at this point in the season, but they had it towards the end when they were maybe rotating players here and there, knowing they'd be in the playoffs. But you've got to drop points at some point through the season. I think as long as we bounce back from it, which admittedly I said that against Oxford and we haven't quite managed to. But it'll be interesting after the break if we can go to Norwich and win, which I think will be high on a lot of City fans' radar given certain situations. It'll be massive.
Yeah, I think I agree with you totally. I saw a thread on Twitter earlier today that was kind of breaking down, the actual stats behind it. And when you look at it, it's not like the system's not working. It's not a case of. I think there's a bit of a reaction to Saturday's game where people said it was a bit more back to the man in ball style. I obviously we have quite a weird view of watching the game as we're doing work as we watch, but I didn't think it was quite back to that. I think that's quite a, I think you can think that, but that probably takes out the chances that City's missed. If you think of the McCrory chances on the break that he had, you think of the Twine chance that he skied. There was some really fluid Struber ball, as it's kind of known, in there. They're still creating chances. Defensively, it's individual errors, it feels like, that are giving up goals rather than a systemic issue, I think it'd be fair to say. So I think you kind of need to be able to take a step back and just kind of almost forget what happened in that first block. If you look at the performances in this last block, you've had 2 bad days at the office, and QPR, you'd probably say it's actually really one bad half at the office.
Yep.
Because, like, you know, you were 1-0 up, looking fairly comfortable, and if you'd scored a second, you'd have killed it off. Oxford is just a bad day at the office, but equally it was a bad day in sort of one specific area of set pieces. And since then, they've basically looked pretty rock solid from set pieces. And then Preston and Ipswich, you could have quite easily taken 6 points. And I keep making the point in my verdict. I don't like doing the coulda, shoulda, woulda. But I think that's the only way you can assess games fairly, is if you think that slice of luck goes this way, that slice of luck goes that way. And, you know, if we've been sitting here with, I don't know, let's say they'd beaten Ipswich, Preston, Sheff Wednesday, drawn against QPR, and lost, Oxford was their only loss, and you went, they've had one bad day, we'd all be going, oh my God, what a great block of games again. And, you know, the injuries are probably adding to that feeling. It does feel like it's all a bit miserable heading into the break, doesn't it? But it could have been so much better. And I think that's why it's not time to head to panic stations yet at all. You know, there's a lot of football to be played, a lot of points up for grabs, and a lot to still be positive about.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I mean, I've not heard anyone sort of in person at least doubt Struber. There's the odd buffoon online, but otherwise, everyone else seems to have their heads screwed on with what's going on. I won't mention any names about those people online. They know who they are, I'm sure.
If you've been called out as one of the buffoons by Jack today, please get in contact with the podcast. We'll compensate you for the stress he's put you through there. But I think that kind of brings us to an end, really, Jack. I think it's been a bit of a therapeutic chat, that one, after quite a tough old weekend, really, and tough week. Not because of bad performances, even, really, just because of poor results. You mentioned that Norwich game. Obviously, the attention will probably turn to that one back end of this week, and rightly so. I think we'll do a little preview to that one, probably, because of the added talk around it heading into it. We can have a little bit of an assessment of where we are post-international break, post-press conference. Hopefully, we get a couple of injury updates. As usual, we'll have content out on the site, you know, over the next few days, trying to think of inventive stuff to keep everyone engaged over the break, which I know can be quite difficult. But yeah, Jack, thanks for hopping on, as usual. Anything you want to, any parting shot from you?
Not really. Hopefully we come back and win some football games. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be
That's
lovely.
about it. Thanks,
that's perfect. Well, as usual, thanks everyone for listening. Please like, rate, subscribe, whatever it is you do on wherever you listen today. As always, can keep across all the coverage with Bristol Live online by Jack and me both on Twitter and Jack on YouTube. So drop him a follow. Help those views out for both of us. Until then,
they're there at the moment.
Well, on that happy note, until next week, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time.